Hello, my name is Christina Sigmund. I'm from the Prestice Department of Poultry Science, and today I'm going to talk to you about small-scale poultry processing, or really on-farm poultry processing. So here are our topics that we will cover to explain how to properly and healthily process your birds, also chill them, package and label them. Then we'll talk a little bit about different breeds that you can select for both egg and meat production. We'll go over biosecurity and pest control and why it's important, and then we'll end with animal welfare and consumer considerations. Now on to feed withdrawal and then catching and holding. Feed withdrawal is one of the most important things that you can do. You should remove your feeders 8 to 12 hours prior to processing. And why do we do this? Because it reduces the possible fecal and crop contamination during gut removal, or as we call it, evisceration. However, if your processing is delayed more than 18 hours, return the feed to them. And water must be provided for the entire period, even when you have them in your holding crates. So, catching and holding. The first thing you want to do is confine your birds to a smaller area, and this reduces the stress when you're catching them. You also want to use transport. You also want to use crates to transport birds into small groups. These can be either metal or plastic pet pens or poultry crates. I have even used a large 50-gallon trash can. Also, sometimes it's easier to catch your birds at night or before dawn because your birds will be less active and therefore easier to catch. After you've caught them, and you place them into your holding containers, you don't want to overcrowd your birds because they can quickly overheat. And if you're processing on a day when there's warm weather or it's a delay in processing, mist your birds with cool water and also provide fans on hot days. The other thing you really want to do is keep them in a shaded area prior to processing because this keeps them calm and overheating. Now, here are some of the different items that you can use for catching. We have poultry hooks, poultry catching net, and another thing that you can use is from Premier One Supplies is their poultry net. Now these have the small movable posts which you can see to the left of the photo with the woman, and this allows you to move the post to create a smaller area to catch your birds. The other nice thing about these fences is they can be electrified to keep out predators. Items for holding, like I described before, can be either your poultry transport crate or your metal pet crate. Now, after we've gotten our birds into the holding area, then we're going to move on to blood draining, or it's also called exsanguination. So we want to use a killing cone to restrain the bird, and you can see them pictured in all of the 4 pictures. And you can see that you can use many different methods. But really, you want to restrain the bird because this allows for a better meat quality in the end. The other thing you can purchase is a bleeding stand that holds the cones and actually catches the blood. So how do we use these kill cones to drain the blood from our birds that we're processing? Well, the first thing in the top photo, you want to insert the bird head first with the wings folded against the body and with the neck pointing towards you. Then what you want to do is, if your bird's head is not below the bottom of the cone, just reach up in there and gently pull the bird's head out and then pinch the neck, and then you're going to cut the carotid arteries and the jugular veins on both sides of the neck by a deep cut in the front. You want to make sure that you get all 4 veins, or all 4 arteries and veins. You also don't want to cut the spinal cord or esophagus because you actually get a better bleed out. You want to bleed out your bird for 1.5 to 3 minutes. During this time, you know your bird is dead if you touch its eyeball. If the bird blinks, you need to go back through and cut the veins and the arteries again. However, if you get no blink, that means that your bird is dead and it's ready to go into the scalder. Now, a cleanup tip for using these kill cones, because they will get kind of bloody, is if you spray your cones before you use them with mineral oil, you'll get easier cleanup in the end after we're done with our processing. So now we're going to discuss what types of equipment to use for both scalding and plucking. So most of the processing equipment you can actually buy online. The equipment that is actually currently owned by Harnett County Extension Office was purchased from Featherman, and you can see it's all three pieces. It's your cones, your bleed stand, your scalder, and your picker, and this was purchased for $3,655. Cornerstone Farm Ventures and CC Only Coops and Equipment also sell the same equipment, just different types. However, if you're thinking about purchasing any equipment, consider purchasing a picker plucker first, because this is really your most time-saving thing. Also, if you don't wish to purchase a scalder, you can use a turkey fryer and simply scald 1 or 2 birds at a time. So scalding is important. You want to keep your temperature between 125 and 140 degrees, and you're going to scald for 60 to 90 seconds. You're going to adjust this temperature as needed, and depending on the type of poultry that you scald, your temperature might be higher or lower. For example, ducks need a higher scald temperature. So you're going to gently move and dunk the bird in the scalder. You're going to do this for a little bit, pull the bird out, test the feathers on the wings, and these should be easy to pull out. However, if you scald too long, your skin will likely tear in your picker and plucker. And also, if you scald too long, your skin will look cooked. It'll end up kind of looking dry on your evisceration table. And another tip to make it safer is to purchase some heavy-duty rubber gloves so you can safely dunk the birds in this hot water. Picking and plucking. So a good picker will remove almost all of the feathers in about 25 to 45 seconds. While the birds are in the picker, you want to continuously spray them with water in the picker because you get better feather removal, and this also prevents your skin from tearing inside your picker. Then any of the feathers that are left on the wings and the tail, you can just pull those off by hand. So now that we have our bird picked, we are ready to eviscerate and prepare the carcass. So first, let's talk about tools to actually do all this stuff. So the knives that you might see in your processing demos are sometimes the Dexter, Russell, SanaSafe, Chicago Cutlery, or Victorinox knives. These knives have a nice grip on the handle, so when you're processing birds and your hands are wet, they won't slip out of your hands. The other thing to note about these knives is when I'm processing, I prefer a short blade, anywhere between 3 and 4 inches long. And this allows me to have better control over my evisceration. The other thing I like to have with me is scissors. The Kai 5240s are the green-handled scissors that you see, and these are nice for making initial cuts into your bird. Bone shears can also be used when you're actually cutting through bones, like the ones made by Kloss. Loppers you can actually use to remove the legs or hot cutting, and this does it very easily and quickly. However, sometimes you leave pieces of sharp bones behind that can hinder your packaging. The other thing you also really want to have is a knife and a scissor sharpener to keep these sharp the whole time. Other tools that you're going to need are the heavy-duty rubber gloves for scalding, mineral oil. You're going to want nitrile latex gloves for your evisceration steps, aprons to keep yourself clean. The other thing is 2 food-grade hoses. You're going to have one for your picker area and then one for your evisceration table. These can be found in RV sections, in the big stores, or also in home improvement stores. Then 2 spray nozzles. A stainless steel work table is great for your evisceration because it's very easy to sanitize. You also need some 5-gallon buckets to hold your guts during processing to keep them off your table. And then a cut-up cone. This can be used for deboning. So how do you keep your knives and scissors sharp? Well, the first thing is important is you want to use a separate knife for your blood draining and keep that knife on that side. Other thing you want to do is avoid cutting into the bones because this dulls your knife. You want to sharpen often during evisceration, so I like to keep a sharpener close by me. And then if any of your knives or scissors get contaminated with fecal or crop matter, just clean and sanitize them before moving on to your next bird. So now we're going to move on to the steps of evisceration and all that. So we're going to go through steps 1 through 11. Note that I put that the leg and the oil gland gets removed first, but you can do this after you remove the head if that's the process that you desire. But really you want to just make sure to remove all 3 of those prior to your evisceration. So we'll start with leg removal. So you want to begin with your carcass with your breast side up. You're going to start on one leg and you're going to bend the leg back and you're going to cut between the hock joint, which you see I'm pointing to in the top photo of number 1. Then you want to cut through the ligaments on one side. Next, you're going to bend the leg back and forth to loosen the other ligaments, and then you're going to finish cutting off the leg at the ligaments. If you do this correctly, you can avoid cutting the bones the entire time. This is what your carcass will look like after you remove its legs. And your feet can be sold if your foot pads have no burns. So what do I mean by a burn foot pad? Well, from the photo at the top, you can see that score 0 has no visible burns, but score 1 and 2, the foot pads are burned, normally because of wet litter. So score 0 looking feet can be sold, score 1 and 2 cannot. You want to remove this yellow skin and then you want to wash them. The yellow skin is very easy to remove if you've completely scalded the whole foot. Then you just want to follow the guidelines for packaging and selling. Next, we're going to move on to oil gland removal. You're going to turn the bird over with the breast side down. Then, with a knife, you're going to cut vertically across the tail with the knife. Then you will turn the blade down and you will cut horizontally to remove the gland. There are some people that just choose to remove the tail altogether. That is fine, but if you leave the tail on, this is part of your sellable product. So the oil gland is a yellow substance, and this is also called the preen gland, and this is what your birds use to apply oil to their feathers. Now, removal is important because it can affect the taste of the cooked bird, and you can see in the bottom photo how the oil gland is completely removed. If you still have a bit of the yellow substance left over after you're doing this, that can be rinsed off during your final rinse step. Head removal is next. So you want to place the carcass on its back. You want to face the head towards you. You want to hold the carcass in the breast area with one hand and pull downward with a moderate force. The head will normally disconnect at the top of the neck. If this does not happen, you can use another knife, which is your knife that you can use to cut through bones, and you will simply cut around the neck muscle, and then it'll be easier to break the head off. Next, we move on to crop separation. So, with the bird facing breast up, you want to cut the neck skin to the top of the breast. Then, you want to find the esophagus and the trachea. The trachea is also called the windpipe. And you want to gently pull them from the skin and the neck. So connective tissue holds the esophagus and trachea to the neck. And connective tissue holds everything else inside of the body. So when we're eviscerating, that's one of the main steps, is really loosening the connective tissue. So after I find the esophagus and the trachea, I'm going to follow them down to where the crop is. And in the photo, you can see that the crop was attached to the right breast in this picture. So to remove, follow your esophagus down, and then you will gently loosen the connective tissue that's holding the crop to the breast. It is easiest to do this with your thumb and fingertips to gently pull it away from the breast muscle. You want to be careful not to puncture the crop. If you do and crop matter comes out, just rinse the carcass. The next thing you want to do is ensure that both your crop, trachea, and esophagus are completely loosened for cleaner evisceration. This is by far one of the hardest steps for people because the crop is quite transparent when you actually open up the animal when you've had proper feed withdrawal. So this is a good area just to take your time on. Next, a little bit of internal anatomy review when I go into the evisceration process. So we can see from the top how the esophagus is attached to the crop, which moves down into the proventriculus and then into the intestines, ending at the cloaca or the vent. You can also see at the very top how the lungs are attached to the rib cage and also how the kidneys are actually attached to the back also. This is what the digestive system looks like. So you can see the liver and the gizzard. These are going to be our 2 sellable giblets. So now we're going to talk about opening the body cavity. And you have 2 options of how you can do this. This really depends on if you plan to market your birds or if you plan to eat them on your own, because either option can leave more or less skin behind. So the first option is opening the body cavity at the vent, which is also called the cloaca. So what you want to do is you want to make a shallow cut with a knife on both sides of your vent. However, you don't want to cut too deep or you might cut into the intestines. Some people use this option but hang their bird from a shackle to use this evisceration process. When your bird is hanging from the shackle, it's easy to do this if you hold on to the cloaca with one of your fingers and cut with your other hand. So the other thing is you can also use scissors for shallow cuts around it. Sometimes I prefer to use scissors doing this because I feel like I have more control over my cuts. Once again, you also don't want to cut too deep or you might cut into the intestines. So I am holding on to the vent with my fingers. Then I'm going to cut all around the vent until I can pull the large intestine away from the body. And sometimes you have to loosen some connective tissue after cutting so you can actually pull the vent away from the body. And I like to do that because that means that if any other fecal matter comes out, then that vent is far away from my carcass. So the next option, you can actually start at the rib cage. You want to place the chicken on the back, then you want to position your knife under the rib cage, slice through the skin and muscle carefully to make a small opening in the abdomen, like in the photos that I show you on the bottom. Then the next, what you want to do is you want to cut up both sides of the rib cage, avoiding the organs. And you will be cutting both through skin and a bit of muscle on this side. Then you want to cut down one side towards the vent and cloaca. And notice on the bottom photo, I have cut down one side, but my vent and cloaca is still attached. During this entire time, avoid putting pressure on the intestine belly area while you're cutting. I prefer to stick my fingers in there and hold the skin out while I am cutting down. However, if any fecal matter leaks out, rinse this immediately. And rinse off your table if any fecal matter gets on that. So I have cut down one side of my bird. Then I'm going to reach in with my fingers and find where my large intestine attaches to my vent cloaca on the outside. And you can see in the top photo how I have one of my fingers under that intestine. Then that allows me to view better to cut around the vent and to completely pull the intestine away from the body like you see in the bottom photo. And once again, you're probably going to have to loosen some connective tissue after cutting to be able to pull the vent away. So now I am ready to pull out all the guts and the viscera. And this is something that you do very slowly. So with your hands inside, you're going to loosen the connective tissue around all parts. And this is really like your hands with a cupping motion going on both sides. The digestive system is in its own connective tissue sac, just like the heart and the lungs are within their own sac. So these are something that you have to break through in order to pull everything out. Then you want to reach above the liver and gently pull. When I do this, I can normally feel my knuckles against the rib cage at the top of the bird. The reason why I'm reaching above the liver is I want to avoid bursting the gallbladder. And this is, that has bile, the very greenish liquor that you see, and you want to rinse the cavity if this occurs. The other thing, if you're processing a laying hen, you're going to want to remove the egg yolks, the oocyst. You also might have an egg inside that has not been formed. If the egg has a shell on it, you can actually eat this egg. Next, we're going to remove the lungs. So the lungs are attached to the rib cage. The way you do this is you reach in on one side with 2 fingers, and you're going to rake along the ribs to detach the lungs. And you will do this on both sides, on the left side with your left hand and on the right side with your right hand. However, some people's hands are a bit too big, so it's easier for them to use a lung scraper. And you see that I've pictured that tool on the bottom. Next, we'll move to harvesting the giblets. So you can harvest the heart, the liver, and the gizzard. For harvesting the heart, normally the heart will not come out when you remove all the viscera. So you want to reach far into the carcass and place one hand around the heart and pull it out. Then you want to cut open your heart, rinse out your coagulated blood, and place this in a clean container. If you wish to harvest your liver, you want to make sure to cut around your gallbladder, which is the green sac that you see pictured in the photo below. You want to cut around this and ensure not to burst this sac at all. And you also want to pull away any connective tissue that you have on your liver. And rinse the parts of your liver if your gallbladder leaks. For harvesting the gizzard is the large muscular organ that grinds the food into smaller pieces. And this is the area in which the bird will store the grit stones. So you want to cut the gizzard from the intestine. Then you want to slice it open and rinse everything thoroughly. Then with your fingers, you can easily peel away the yellow lining and then rinse it and place it into a clean container. So now we've gotten our bird completely eviscerated. So what are our final steps before our bird goes into the chiller? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to wash and inspect the bird prior to placing in our antimicrobial dip. You want to thoroughly wash the carcass and inspect to make sure that all the internal organs, the trachea and the oil gland are removed. Sometimes when eviscerating, a bit of your trachea can get stuck and it doesn't completely pull through. So just check the top of the neck area to make sure that's gone. The other thing to note is on the bottom photo, the kidneys and the testes do not need to be removed. These will actually dissolve during cooking. However, the kidneys are removed in commercial processing plants with a vacuum machine, and they are removed at the same time as the lungs. The next thing you want to do is submerge your carcass into an antimicrobial dip. This is important, especially if you're marketing your birds. However, if you're processing your birds for yourself to eat, you don't necessarily have to do an antimicrobial dip, but remember to chill your bird and then properly cook your bird to temperature. Anti-microbial dip calculations. You can use a 2% lactic acid solution. You can purchase your 88% lactic acid solution at home brewing and winemaking stores. You can also find this online. Just make sure that is 88% lactic acid solution. So you're going to mix 3 ounces of your lactic acid with 125 ounces of water, and this makes a 1 gallon, 2% lactic acid solution. You can also use a 50 parts per million chlorine bleach solution. So you want to keep your birds in the dip for 30 seconds. Then you'll move them and you will allow them to drip dry before placing them in the chiller. Assume about 1 gallon for every 15 to 25 birds for your dip. And if you're processing more birds than this, have some extra dip made up so you can move through this process quickly. After this, we're going to move into chilling. And you want to assume that you need 5 pounds of ice per bird. You can see on the photos below that you can use many different things for chiller. You can actually buy a chiller, or you can use some large coolers for your chilling. The most important thing about this is you want your carcass to be less than 40 degrees Fahrenheit within 4 to 8 hours. And this depends on the size of your bird. You can also add a circulating pump to a chill tank for a shorter chill time. However, if contamination occurs, if someone puts in a bird that has fecal matter into your chill water, you want to change your chill water. So some of the questions that I normally get asked in processing demos is, should I process my sick or injured birds? Well, unhealthy looking birds should be processed last to avoid contamination of the healthy carcasses. And obviously unhealthy birds should not be marketed after processing. If you have any injured birds, such as those with a broken wing or bad legs, you should process these birds first to reduce the suffering. After you process these birds, and if you notice an abscess in the broken wing, you will want to remove this wing or any other abscesses before packaging. So what should you not process? Well, broilers sometimes can get ascites, or what they call water belly. And this can be caused by different things. In broilers, normally it's attributed to congestive heart failure because their growth rate is so high. However, with other birds, it can actually be due to disease, liver disease, kidney failure, cancers. So how you can tell this happens is when you see a bird that is yet to be cut into, its belly might be a bit distended. When you make your initial cut into the belly, you will actually see the liquid when cutting into the body cavity. And it's normally pale yellow, or it's a clear fluid, and it can smell very terrible if the bird has signs of disease. If you go online and you look at different blog posts, there are some people that have said that they have processed these birds and safely eaten them. That is up to you. However, we encourage you to not process these birds since they might have disease. So after we've done all this, we move on to the important part, which is cleaning and sanitation of all our equipment. So if any fecal or crop matter gets on there, just remember to regularly sanitize your surfaces, knives, and other tools. The next thing that you also want to do to keep a clean work area is you want to make sure to discard all feathers and guts on work surfaces during processing. After you have drained all the blood from the birds and scalded them, you can place the kill cones in the scalder, and this helps in the initial blood removal from the cones. Next, you want to clean all your work surfaces and tools with warm water and soap. Then you want to remove your cones from the scalder after they've soaked, I would say for 10 to 15 minutes, and you want to clean those with soap and water also. Next thing you want to do after everything is clean is you want to sanitize your work area. You want to coat all your surfaces, your scalder, your plucker, your kill cones with spray sanitizers and allow them to dry. You can use a 5 to 10% chlorine bleach solution or a 0.02% quat solution, and this is quaternary ammonia chloride for sanitizing. After your metal equipment is cleaned and sanitized, you can spray some mineral oil on them to prevent corrosion. This is good for parts like your meat grinders to keep your blades from getting rusted. So after we have chilled our birds for a minimum of 4 to 8 hours, then we can move on to cut up and deboning if you wish to go to that process. So if you want to cut up and debone your bird must be chilled first. And you should not do this until after 4 hours of chill due to rigor mortis. So what is rigor mortis? This is the stiffening of the joints and the muscles. If you debone when your bird is not chilled, you remove the muscle attachments from the bone, and then your muscles will stiffen up much more than if your muscle is still on the bone. This is sometimes easier to do using a cut-up cone. And you can see in all three of the photos, a cut-up cone was used. So why do we chill the bird for 4 to 8 hours? This really is due to the aging time and the meat tenderness. On this graph, you can see your shear value is on your y-axis. Your aging hours is on your x-axis. And shear value is the meat tenderness that's measured when the cooked meat is sheared with a blade. So you can see the higher the shear value, the tougher the meat. Increased aging of the meat before packaging or deboning increases the temperature. You can see on the graph, between your 4 to 8 hour aging hours, you get the most tender meat. So you've processed all these birds, and you might be thinking about how you can sell them. Well, you can visit the North Carolina Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services website on the Meat and Poultry Index. You can apply to attain a producer-grower poultry exemption. And this allows you to process and sell either 1,000 or 20,000 healthy birds within that year. You can only sell in North Carolina. And poultry refers to the domesticated birds, which are chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, guineas, radites, and squabs. And what are radites? Those are ostriches and emus. So if you do decide to sell under a poultry exempt operator, all of your products produced under this exemption must be labeled with the following 4 things: the processor's name, the address, the statement, the exemption statement, and the safe handling instructions that you see pictured on your right. If you have any more questions about this, I encourage you to visit the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services website. So here are the 2 differences between the producer of 1,000 limit and the producer grower of 20,000 limit. And note that they are all the same, it's just different guidelines you have to follow. However, you cannot have interstate distribution. So how do I become a distributor? For this, you can apply for a meat and poultry handler's registration. Now this allows you to receive, store, transport, and sell fully marked, labeled, and wholesome meat and or poultry products, meaning that you can receive other people's poultry products and sell them. However, once again, these may not be shipped across state lines, just like in your exemptions. If you have any more questions, I encourage you to visit the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services website. So you might be wondering, what are some good breeds for egg and meat production? And these slides were provided by Dr. Ken Anderson, who works in Extension and is our commercial layer and small flock management professor. So for heritage strains, you could go with the white egg breeds, like your Leghorns, brown egg breeds, which are dual purpose, like your Plymouth Rocks, your Rhode Island Reds. You can also visit the American Livestock Breed Conservancy for information on heirloom breeds. If you wish to go into commercial strains, there are also birds for the white egg and the brown egg strains. Commercial meat strains would come from Arbor Acres, Ross, Cobb, or Hubbard. Here are some photos of the strains that I talked about in the previous slide. And if you wanted to do meat production solely, you could go beyond the Cornish crosses, or you could go into other stocks like your Label Rouge. These are your naked neck chickens. They have a very low mortality. However, they do take longer, up to 12 weeks, to reach the weight of 5 pounds. So you have your birds on your farm, and now we're going to talk about biosecurity and why it matters. Effective biosecurity for your birds means that you want to give them a safe area. So you want to have a fence around your farm or your birds. You want to have shoes for your farm use only. It's best to always sanitize your vehicle interior and tires. You want to limit exposure to outside birds because these are the birds that we know to bring in other diseases. You want to practice proper rodent and pest control. Have clean coveralls and shoe covers. Have those for visitors also. And you really want to treat everyone as a visitor. However, sometimes you're the visitor, and you risk bringing pests or diseases to your birds if you visit another farm. However, if you have shoes reserved for your farm only, then you reduce this risk. So a good practice for some people is they have a shoe changing area before they go into where their birds are. The other thing is you really want to always practice good biosecurity to keep you and your birds healthy. One way to do this is pest control. So where do you focus? Well, really, environmental control is our best option for prevention. You want to have good biosecurity and entry to the farm and each individual house. And this is all within our control. The bugs and the pests that come in, some of that is not within our control. You also want to control the people. You want to control your equipment. So for example, don't let multiple people use the same equipment if they have birds also. And you also want to control their pest. All these animals listed below are all known to carry different diseases. Earthworms are known to carry the cecal worms and also roundworms that can affect your birds, and these would be intestinal parasites. So for controlling flies, you really have 3 different methods. You can choose fly parasites, and these are small flightless bugs that actually kill the larvae of the fly. You can use fly traps to get the adult flies. And you can also go up to fly bait to also kill the adult flies. So using a combination of all these methods can actually help reduce your fly populations. For rodent control, you have 2 different options. You can go with something like the catch-all trap, which is a multiple catch mouse trap, and this uses no bait. This trap works better the more mice that you catch with it, because the mice are actually drawn to the smell inside the trap. You could also use rodent bait stations. There are several different sizes and different baits that can be used. When people use the rodent bait stations, sometimes they will switch between different baits for effectiveness. So animal welfare and why it matters. So you've grown all your birds and you're ready to process them. So why should you care about animal welfare? Well, one of the things to consider is ethics and economics. And really, the best economical results are generally related to a higher growth rate. But this has also been associated with negative effects on bird welfare. Take, for instance, a higher growth rate can actually lead to bad legs, woody breast syndrome. So at the Press's Department of Poultry Science, we practice the 5 freedoms of animal well-being. And this is freedom from hunger and thirst. So you always want to make sure that your birds have access to fresh water and a good diet. Freedom from pain, injury, and disease. Freedom from fear and distress. You want to have them in conditions which avoid mental suffering. Freedom from discomfort. So you want to provide them an appropriate environment, including shelter and a comfortable resting area. And also freedom to express normal behavior. You want to see your birds happy, walking around, having enough room. So why do we promote animal welfare? It is our obligation as animal caretakers. These birds have been domesticated by us, so we must ensure that they have the best quality life. And this is the 5 freedoms of animal welfare. And also, your consumers react to animal production practices. If consumers do not like your practices, you will likely not sell your product. And the last thing I would like to say is if you are thinking about selling your product, please look into the total cost of it and also talk to your local producers about how they market their products, what prices they sell their products, because there's not a lot of return in selling your poultry products. So think about those things. Should you have any questions about the resources that I had in this presentation, they are listed here. The image resources. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and ask if there are any questions.